Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are viewing from the circumpolar Arctic. And welcome to the 4th edition of the Arctic Youth Network webinar series. My name is Samantha Macbeth, and I will be today's host again for Arctic Youth Network. Today's subject will be on environmental stewardship, and I'm really excited about today's talk. They've all been really fun, but this is something that is close to my heart because I'm also a biologist and a conservation activist in my own day-to-day life. So this is something that I'm really excited to be able to have a conversation about today. Now, for those of you who are just joining us either on Zoom or on Facebook, a little reminder that this webinar will be recorded and will be made available on both the Arctic Youth Network website as well as on our YouTube channel. There will also be a transcript. So if at any point the internet connection is not suitable and you're not hearing things and you'd like to check information that was shared in this particular webinar, you'll have access to just the text base as well as a recording of this video. So I hope you find that helpful, even in areas with lower bandwidth, right? So today's subject on environmental stewardship is something that was very high on the list of subject matters that the Arctic Youth Network members wanted to be able to discuss with this webinar series. It's something that they hold very dear to their heart as members of Arctic countries, with good reason, right? The Arctic is one of the areas that is the fastest changing in the world. And as young professionals, as youth living in these areas and seeing that change and hearing about that change, it's worrisome, right? And it's something that we want to get involved with and want to have our voice and have an understanding of what we can do. So today we have two other speakers joining us who are both, working very hard in that matter in their own right, in their own areas. And without further ado, I would like to have them both introduce themselves, and they'll give a slight presentation about their role and what they've played in environmental stewardship in their areas. And afterwards, we'll have a moderated discussion. So we'll have a period where we'll be able to talk about different, biodiversity and conservation issues around the circumpolar area and youth involvement in those subject matters. So if you do at any point have any questions that you'd like to ask, I have a few myself, but please feel free to use the Zoom chat or the Facebook chat because I'll be monitoring those to see if you have anything you'd like to ask any of the three of us. So without further ado, I'd like to start with Maria. I'm sorry.
It's fine. I told her she was allowed to use Maria instead of Þorgerður. So my name is Þorgerður Maria Þorbjarnardóttir. I am the chair of the Icelandic Youth Environmentalist Association, and I will actually do a little bit of a background on me in my presentation. So I will just share my screen right now. So this is me, and the best way I know how to inspire others and to get a message across is to tell a story. So I'm going to tell you the story of how I got involved in activism. And so yes, I can't switch between, I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties. Okay. So I grew up in Egilsstaðir. It's a small town. You can see it. Here. Here's Egilsstaðir, and very close to my hometown there was this this reservoir. This dam was built. It's very large, and it destroyed a lot of wilderness. So the planning agency said that it destroyed about more than 900 square kilometers of wilderness. So even though it didn't sink all that land underwater, it kind of made people's experience different in those areas. So this is something like a life-changing event that kind of got me into thinking at least about this. And I'm not saying that everybody needs a big life-changing event to become activists, or that, you know, something that is life-changing to one person doesn't have to be life-changing to others, so it doesn't have to be very large. But for me, this was something that really got me thinking. Because Icelandic nature is very unique, because we are in the Arctic and we are an island, and the biodiversity is that we have Arctic species, we have somewhat isolated species of trees and the Arctic fox, and so that's unique for Iceland. And then we have our geology, which is also very important. We are on a continental drift. There's a hot spot underneath the island, and we have glaciers because we're far up north, and there's volcanoes underneath the glaciers, and all of this is something that is very unique on the planet. So Vatnajökull National Park is actually on UNESCO's heritage list because it is that important, and I work there in the national park as a ranger during summers as well, because I want to talk to you about the threats of conservation in Iceland. So there are mainly these three threats. It's excessive grazing of sheep. We have a lot of sheep in Iceland, and I'm not saying all sheep are horrible, but we have too many sheep, and we're just letting them graze too big of land. And then we have tourism, and the tourism can be somewhat unpredictable, and we rely heavily on it. Like we can see now in COVID, we're getting a crisis in finance because we've been relying so much on tourism. And then it can also be a little bit unexpected. So somebody takes an Instagram photo, for example, of a really beautiful place, geotags it, suddenly there's hundreds of people going there. You know, Justin Bieber comes here and he takes this video in a valley, and then everybody goes to that valley, and the areas are maybe not prepared to bear all of these visitors. And then we have overproduction of electricity, because even though we have green electricity and it's somewhat climate friendly, we are also using a lot of the electricity for industry, for aluminum factories, and so on. So we have a lot of electricity, and I don't really think we need that much more. We need to arrange it much better. Because like you saw in the beginning, when you build dams, you also destroy geo and biodiversity, and the effects can be really big. So as a kid, as a teenager, I felt really confused about what was right, what was wrong, because I felt that on one hand there was nature that I cared a lot about and had all of these feelings towards, and then there was employment. And in my hometown, this big dam that was built, it goes, all of the electricity goes straight to aluminum factory, and it provided a lot of jobs and somewhat security for the population to be able to stay where they want to live, and so on. So I felt like if I was speaking on behalf of nature, I was against the people, and it made me confused. Like you can see, I'm in this picture. It's a very confused teenager. Then I started to educate myself and started to participate in the NGO of the Icelandic Youth Environmental Association, which is, there's the logo. And then I also learned geology as a bachelor. Well, what I learned was that it's good to talk to people, to explain why nature is important to you, and listen to them why other things are important, then try to somehow learn more about the governance, about the need, about, you know, how society works, and how people think, and what is important to the people that are taking the decisions. So what I've learned is that my voice it really matters. And I've gained a lot of confidence that I don't need to know everything. I don't need to be a special person to be able to care about things and to be able to talk to people about what is important to me. So as long as you are true to your values, you take, for example, I think nature has a right to be there. And if we're going to destroy it for some reason, we better have a very good reason. It can't be just like the first thing that comes to our mind. It can't be just easy solutions to difficult problems. So if you have good communication skills and rational thinking, and you can show empathy to people, then I think in the end you end up having good conversation and start explaining to others what your values are, and then you kind of get this mutual conversation going on that is really important. And just don't lose your confidence because other values exist, because they are all important and also yours. So what I've learned in this process is that once you start getting the ball rolling, you can end up meeting a lot of people and important people. And I've recently, well, this has been a slow process, but these are photos from me meeting MPs. So I've met all of the political parties in Iceland to talk about climate change. So this is something that can be achieved, but I'm not saying that everybody can achieve something like this. I definitely come from a really privileged place that in Iceland getting in contact with MPs is really easy because the population is not very big and it's just very open. But it can be like I hope it can be an inspiration to others that, if you are having good conversations, you're talking to people and you ask, I want to meet this person, and you talk to them, then you can kind of get the conversation going, and don't just like push through with all of your everything you have to say and not listen back, because I don't think that would be very successful. I wrote a book that has a little bit more details about my methods. I co-wrote it with Peter Halldórsson, who is the former chair of the association. And so I think if you want to know more about the how and not just the reasons why I did all of everything I have been doing, then you can definitely read this book. You can find everything that you want on my page, þorgerðarmaria.is. The book is there, and also some of the articles I've written, and just some information about me and my background. But that's pretty much everything I had to say. I hope that I have inspired you to kind of start to have conversations with the people around you, and try to influence people around you with your strong values of caring about the environment. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I have a few questions that come up from that excellent presentation, and I'm excited to discuss about some of them. But before we do, I want to give the floor to Nils to introduce himself, let us know where he's calling from, and a little bit about his experience when it comes to youth being involved in environmental stewardship.
My name is Nilsson Nabar. I'm come from Jokkmokk, Sweden currently. And that was one hell of a presentation. I can't say I'm that prepared, but well, I'm more of my perspective from the whole environmental stewardship. I can't talk English. It has followed me since I was a child, because I am from a reindeer herding community and a reindeer herding family. So I've always learned to respect nature. That's the core of my belief in this world. I have to respect nature, and I follow that belief all my life. But at the same time, I've noticed a lot of issues, especially in the Nordic areas here in northern Sweden, especially in Jokkmokk and areas here. We have a lot of mines, logging, and all of these kind of issues that are clearly not taking these risks of the nature into consideration. So I've been growing up my whole life seeing how the environment has been pushed aside for the benefit of the economy or whatever development. It's always something more important than nature, to say. So I've been with that all my life. I've also noticed a lot of just general confusion on how us indigenous look at this kind of development from a more Western perspective. Most people think we're just in the way because we don't like the extension of the technology or just society in general, but at the same time, they don't have the element of why we see the development as why we see this in a negative aspect, because it doesn't only affect us, especially as reindeer herders. Again, I have a reindeer herding perspective. I can't talk about all Sami because we have fisher Sami and hunting people, but this is a reindeer herding perspective. So we notice that all the expansion from society, especially here in Sweden, has always been pushing towards developing the society in a whole more better economy, making our hometowns store economy, make them bigger, and it's always the focus on pushing for just in general the Western perspective on how to make society better. But for us native people, we have seen this as it pushes aside the biodiversity of nature, our rangers, the nature in general, how it affects, how it has affected the environment in whole. And again, I've seen this my entire life. So I've been working with this my entire life. I've noticed these big problems, and I'm currently mostly focused on my community, as it's a very split view on the development of these kind of issues. On the one we have, this will make our hometown stronger. We will get more money for the people in the town, but at the same time, it's a split on the other side that says it is only a temporary solution to a problem that is currently arising, which is the environment is actually collapsing, and we noticed problems with our grazing. We've seen a decrease in such as bees, bumblebees, and all of these very important just pollinators all over the Nordic areas. But I saw a steady decline that us native people have been warning for this rapid expansion and exploiting of nature. So we've been trying to push in the more direction. We have to use sustainability. That's what we are pushing for. But unfortunately, it's a very large wall and hurdle to get past. Not only because the world doesn't want to view it, our Western world doesn't want to actually go for it, but we have also some problems in our own communities where the old generation they don't notice the effects as much as we who have been growing up with it all the time. We've seen less snow, more volatile winters, and so we are working with our community and against it. So it's a complicated matter, and I've been working a lot within my own Sami by for just small improvement, less driving ATVs in our areas where we have calms because it ruins the earth, but the older generation doesn't see the problems, and we have a lot of discussion that way. But I've been working a lot right now in my local area, just trying to improve it. But I've had luckily opportunities to talk in a lot of ways and bring a more native perspective on the environment issues and how we can resolve them. So, such as this youth seminar here right now, but which has made it more possible for me to actually talk with more people and have a bigger opportunity to push a more native on a lot of issues.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nils. It's tough, right? You brought up something that is incredibly difficult for someone who's starting to notice something that is not right in their landscape and in their community. And Maria, you brought it up as well, is, you know, that initial, like you want to, things can be changed internationally, right? You can have voices at really big forums, but oftentimes it starts really local, right? And when it starts really local, like it's in your family, it's in your community, it's your friends, it's your neighbors. And there is that challenge of having to speak against something that is a job, right? Or a way that's always been done. I know that I had the experience, even, you know, like talking to grandparents, not dumping the used oil from their ATVs or their snowmobiles or their tractors into the ditch. But it's just like, that's how we've always done, right? If there's enough water, it will get diluted. And it's just, no, having them, you know, having that conversation where you can be a little confrontational, which is difficult with elders, with the people that are older than you in your family, especially grandparents. And it's, yeah, that initial challenge is a big part of it, right? Because if you come in with, you know, understanding, you have to be able to communicate that in a way that they can be receptive to. I think, I know that in my life, to be able to have those conversations about environmental protection and animal protection, I find that it's been helpful to reach out to people from a mutual value perspective, in the sense that, you know, telling your parents, telling your grandparents, telling family members, well, you've always told me that I had to keep things clean, and I had to keep, you know, make sure that the food that I was eating was clean and the water that I was drinking was clean. Well, did you know that dropping a drop of oil, one drop will pollute 1 million drops of water? And that's just in the ground around us. And if we're going to plant a garden, like just finding those mutual grounds, especially around values that they themselves have taught you, right, or hold, I found as a solution has been a good way. And it's not exactly psychological warfare, but it can be a little bit, because people can have a bit of a knee-jerk reaction when it comes to environmentalism, right? Even that word, you know, can sometimes really start pulling teeth. How about you? What kind of solutions have you both found to be able to engage people into those initial conversations? How about you, Nils?
If I can start.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's definitely been difficult. And what I have found is that listening, like I spoke about before, listening to other people first, and then try to explain why you are. And also, yeah, environmentalism is largely charged word, and we have the same problem with the grazing. It's always been done like this, and we've been not, you know, examining the land, and then you have all of these data that people just don't believe in. Like when you talk about, well, we should be growing more vegetables than only sheep, because we should try to switch, because well, it just emits too much CO2, and then people don't believe that it does. But the data shows. So it's somewhat trying to find this segue from science and just like hard facts, and trying to make it more understandable. And I don't have any magical solutions, but definitely, like you said, try to connect with people and also tell them that you understand. Don't just tell them that they're wrong. You know, sheep are a very big part of Icelandic culture, and I'm not going to go into this society and say, hey, you should stop doing this right now because it's not realistic. And also it's wrong. I'm not going to take the culture away from people. And but try to talk to them, I am concerned because of how it is affecting the land. And because these are my values, I think we should treat the land with more respect and then try to understand each other. And then you can, even if you don't agree, then you will understand why you don't agree. So you don't like put this stamp on the other person just as the enemy. It's more of a conversation. That's kind of what I've been trying to do mostly.
It's and for me, it's mostly you don't label them as the bad guy or the enemy. You just label them, okay, they don't understand why this is an issue currently. So you have to be able to convince them why what they're doing or what they're thinking might be harmful for the future generation or whatever. Because in the Sami culture, the future generation has always been very important for us. So I usually that's an approach when I'm talking to other Sami people that might be doing something completely illogical, like dumping oil in the woods, in the water, or whatever, and just saying, well, imagine how it will be for your children or your grandchildren, and how what you're currently doing is will affect them in the future. That usually makes them click. But when I'm talking to, let's say, minors or like Swedish people that don't really have the view, it's a lot more difficult. But again, I don't label them as they. I try to explain why the problem is harmful, and I take my perspective again through the Sami, like the future is not. So I talk why nature should be respected, but at the same time, like the ridiculous problem we have in Kiruna, which is 20 miles away from, 200 kilometers from here, which is a large mine. I think it's the biggest mine in Sweden, which has the entire town had to be moved. And we've been talking a lot about it. And at the same time, the youth I've been talking to that work in the mine are usually just taken, well, it's a good way to earn money, but at the same time, it's not great for community. So I asked them, but why are you doing it when the iron won't leave? But this is damaging not only your future, but also your environment where you're living and where your children will grow up. So that usually, the future prospect usually makes them think a bit more of their actions. So they might change what they're doing. Usually, it doesn't always work, but usually most of the time, kinda, not really.
I also think that speaks to, having Sami involvement from the beginning. And it's just, they put the mine and they're like, there, jobs, right? And having local involvement in the development of job opportunities, right? Whatever that is, if it's sustainable resource use, or it's land development, or it's things like that, like it's not being against the idea of jobs, right? It's having meaningful involvement of people who live in that area, in that environment, in how that environment gets used. And I do believe that, like areas like yours, Nils, or, areas of Northern Canada where, it is Indigenous land and it's Indigenous run, and they're pushing for like self-government, right? And allowing that self-government has a lot of areas for solutions, right? Because like you were saying, if you're thinking about how that land will be for children in the next generation, while still allowing, your community to live at a nice level, right? At a level that is both respectful, but also, similar to the rest of the country. Like, it's not about not wanting, like, yes, sure, you want to have snowmobiles and like nice houses. Like, that is not the problem. It's just not having the voices from the very beginning in that development. And mines is a hard one. I know that in Canada, that's what a lot about the development in the Arctic is also, right? When you're north of the polar circle, gas and oil, they've been trying, but it hasn't really been successful yet. And there's now a moratorium at the moment for exploration and development, but who knows, that might get lifted because Canada is an oil country. You can't escape from it. It's like Norway, Canada, you know, we are the fourth biggest exporter of oil after Saudi Arabia, like the three other ones. Like, it's just like a lot of oil gets out of this country, so you can't escape that. But that being said, at the local level in Canada, those conversations are happening, right? And it's the local voices, and it's the, to be perfectly honest, it's a lot of youth voices who made sure that things like that moratorium on exploration for oil and gas has happened. And that has to keep going. There has to be local involvement in the planning of resource use. But that being said, it's at stages, right? You have to do local, and it has to be regional, and then it has to be country-wise. And I know that in my country, those conversations may be happening locally, but there's a big difference, right? Between saying, yeah, this is bad for the environment, but also, you know, Canada buys a pipeline. The federal government is installing, you know, so it's just that systemic change has to happen at every level. So
at the same time, we have the whole, let's say the typical job opportunities which arise with these kind of projects. And judging how it has been in Sweden, by Russia, especially in Russia, there we have a very clear indication how it works in Canada. Most of the job opportunities, they're just they take people from the south up to the north, because you need to specialize, especially in mines nowadays, you have to specialize in machinery. So really job opportunities that arise aren't like the best job. It's mostly grunt work, like fixing the machinery and all these kind of small issues, which are contract work that you only do seasonally. And that's a very big problem. We also see LKAB in Kiruna and Gällivare, where most people that work, well, in the community that work there, a lot of them are just seasonal workers, so in there to repair equipment that has been broken. So that's also an issue we noticed, that is when we discuss about the work rise that this would bring in, it's usually not that much because of the people they bring up from the south. And most of the resources and the money and all these that come from these mines usually also trickle to the north. We can see, especially like, I'll take Murmansk again, it's a perfect example for this. It's a large mining city in Russia, which is like very low standards of living, because of most of the money that the mine gets is sent to the south. So it's problematic to see that these kind of expansions will actually bring jobs for our communities, which usually they don't.
I also think it's important to remember that hugely relying on one thing, like an aluminum factory or a mine or whatever, if the whole community, well, something was happening in the community, right? So there needed to be solutions, there needed to be employment. If you just put all of your money on one horse, just like there comes this company, they say, we're going to provide a lot of jobs. You know, we want to have better solutions than that, because if they then decide, oh, we don't want to be here anymore and go away, then we need somebody else to come and save us, rather than trying to be more sustainable. And this is what I've been trying to raise awareness of, because I don't know how long the aluminum factory is going to be. Well, hydroelectricity is very cheap, and they pay hardly any taxes for their electricity because of some like games with numbers, and basically they're bankrupt on paper or whatever, I don't know. They at least don't pay any taxes, so the money that they provide to the locals is mostly just like small payoffs to sport clubs and to, you know, to kind of keep people happy. And I'm not saying that it's bad to have responsibility there, but they should do other things as well, pay more responsibility, but because most of the money is just some really large corporation. So what I think we need to start thinking now, how do we want to keep people employed and happy, and sustainability is an answer to a lot of that. If the local society is sustainable, then you don't need this big company to come and save you. So And we need to think about that before it happens, because when it happens, people are in crisis mode and just take any solution they get.
Absolutely. It's a little annoying, right, that the conversation always goes back to economy and money, and that, because a lot of it is framed in ways that is a bit confusing and doesn't actually showcase. And you're right, you know, not paying taxes, where does the wealth go? And also the big cost of cleanup, right? Once that industry is over, no matter what it is, who's footing the bill for the waste management, and the rehabilitation of the land, right? And that's often taxpayers. So from the swing point of view, was it actually worth it in the end? And that's a big part of the conversation, that is, you know, education, right? And having people kind of doubt immediately when the answer goes to like, oh yeah, it's economically viable. Well, like, does it include everything? I want to switch gears maybe a little bit, because I know we can talk about sustainability quite a lot, and it's such a big aspect of this. But I did get a question from the Facebook chat from Julia Henson, and she would like to know if we've seen climate change effects in our community well-being, if the changing landscape has had effect in community well-being in various areas where we're from in the Arctic.
I will take it very shortly. The short answer is yes. The long answer is which part of the community? Because right now we had an unprecedented amount of snow coming last week. So it has been a good opportunity for the companies that are plowing snow. But it's also a problem for us reindeer herders. So it's a very complex question, because one area gains a lot of power from the climate change. At the same time, someone else has some kind of ability to do what they're doing. But from a reindeer herding perspective, I'm just saying, yes, we are seeing an unprecedented amount of issues. So we have reindeers dying of, what is it called? Lung diseases. We have issues getting food for them, and because of the winters are so volatile, they don't get either. So we have to feed them in their pens, which again, it makes it a lot easier for diseases to just spread. So from being it in this is just winter where a problem has arisen. The summers are also volatile. We don't know what kind of weather we will get tomorrow or the next between. So in general, we're seeing a lot of big issues in the community, but at the same time, for people that are dog slaying, for example, they also see issues because they don't know when will the winter arrive, when should we prepare for the tour season, and all of these kind of issues. So yes, are seeing a lot of issues through that just climate change in general.
Yes, well, Iceland is well positioned in a way that we don't see the typical, well, it doesn't have the typical effect on us, you know, the sea level rise and all of that doesn't, at least not yet. We don't feel it, but we see the glaciers shrinking. Well, this is obvious. We can just see differences between years. But also we have been, like you were talking about, been seeing a lot more extremes in weathers. The weather has been extreme in well, sometimes in the past, but it's becoming more frequent. But it's difficult to say like this event is the result of climate change, because you know, just the frequency of them is strange already. We've had landslides because of a lot of rain. That's really extreme rain, and of course that has happened before, but we have this in the same year as a big snow avalanche. And just last week we had again, like they were evacuating towns because of snow avalanche risk. And none of this is new, but I think the frequency of it could be linked to just more extremes in the weather systems. So it's not very, it's always a little bit hard. because people are scared and people have died in these events, and I don't want to make it all about me and say, oh, it's because of climate change, but I think it is, but it's a little bit emotionally difficult to kind of raise awareness of that, I think.
Do you think the Arctic is a little bit of kind of a canary in the coal mine, in the sense that the kind of change that we're seeing up here in the north is just kind of a harbinger of what is to come on the rest of the planet?
I don't think that, because we've seen studies that say this is the case. The Arctic communities will notice the most extreme changes. I really wish I could talk from a Russian perspective, from a Russian study perspective, because they have a lot of issues, especially in Siberia now when the permafrost is thing. But in our areas, again, this is mostly the just complete volatile weather. It's impossible to know what will happen. And we have been talking like 20 years ago. My dad could, oh no, this kind of weather will be coming next week, and it usually changes that kind of weather. But now he can just look out and say, I don't know. And at the same time, this also brings another issue, which isn't tied to the whole biodiversity, but it's in Samic culture, is the snow aspect. We have 100 words for snow, but at the same time, we have been seeing of some kind of snow. So these words are disappearing. And at the same time, we can't really tell. If we see the snow on, let's say, the ice, we can tell, oh, this ice is fragile, because it might not be because of the weather. So it's such a risk, because it just puts all our traditional knowledge out the window, because we can't tell if what we know is true anymore. So it puts everything at risk. And mostly because of the weather, we notice a lot. People in the south don't say the same, because they don't notice this kind of just complete insanity of weather that we see up in the north.
If I'm comparing us to other countries, I think we are not the victims here. Also, at least in Iceland, we are privileging from a lot of the past, where there have been what do you call them, colonization, and we've been emitting a lot. And then the countries that are actually having the typhoons, the floods, the water damage, pollution is close to the equator. So I think we are kind of seeing small messages. We're seeing okay, this glacier has been melting. That's strange. We're having more rockfall, so that's strange. But they are actually seeing their islands are sinking. And not in 30 years, not in 40 years, like it's happening now. So I really think that we have some responsibility here, as at least in the more like developed societies, that we need to look at ourselves and say, okay, I am the polluter here. I own a car. I'm privileging from all of these past colonizations. So I need to take responsibility for that and reduce my emissions more than the world needs to do as a whole, because I need to kind of make it easier for others that are in more crisis modes.
These issues don't stop at the borders, right? When it comes to climate, when it comes to what is happening on the planet, we're all in this together, right? We're all on the same spinning ball. Yeah, it's tough, because you want to be able to do things locally, again, from the start of the conversation, but then things have impact at a large international scale, and you want to also offer support to countries being affected around the equator, but you have your own problems back home. So I think part of that, honestly, for I think a lot of young people who want to be involved in environmental stewardship and who want to protect biodiversity and things, be it locally, internationally, it creates a lot of stress, and there is a bit of phenomenon of burnout of people who are involved and who care about these things. So I wonder if you could maybe share on your own point of view, what keeps you energized? What keeps that fire going for the work that you're doing? Anything that you could share with people who are watching and who are feeling a little, scared or tired or depressed about the state of affairs?
I can start. Well, in my presentation, it maybe looked a little bit like I just went straight from thinking to just like meeting MPs. And of course, that didn't happen. So what keeps me energized is speaking to other activists. What happened at first, I kind of knocked on the door and I went to a meeting and there was other youths around me that had more experience. I followed them to meetings. I discussed with them, why are you doing this and why are we doing this now, and why are we meeting this person, like does this person matter, and then kind of mapping in my head how the governance works. And I really think just talking to people, surrounding me with supportive people, it's very important, because also activists frequently experience burnouts. And it's really difficult when you feel like you have the whole world on your shoulders, because you don't. No one person can save everybody. And but if you're in a good group, and and if you feel that you are having too many things on your mind, take a break. Don't feel guilty about it. You can't do everything. And then I just meet my friends, and some of my friends are also environmental, at least they think environmentally, and we will discuss things, and that can be energizing, but also just talk about other stuff once in a while and then come back to it with a fresh mind. I think that is what keeps me energized. I go on hikes and I go skiing, and then I just watch stupid Netflix series sometimes and do everything that I need to do to keep myself active. Yeah, that is, make this a little bit of a wall between this is me at work, this is me enjoying my life and not having all this responsibility.
Yeah, it's a lot, as Maria said, just having a support group and just being able to disconnect from the reality that you're living in currently, to just be able to relax. And of course, if this kind of work just stresses you out to no belief, then really, for me, just being able to take your mental health is the most important part to being able to actually do a change. Just keeping yourself sane and actually just realizing this isn't good for my mental health. Just then take a break, pull back, and just think just the small ways you can support your community, or just think about small things you can do, like not taking a plastic bag when you're going shopping, for example. Just always think about the small things that you can do to support whatever you're doing, what kind of environmental work you're doing, because you always do a part of it. But for me personally, I have a bit of a nihilistic viewpoint, because I just don't see a point of things. So, but I have created a point for my existence to just be able to make the world that I'm living a bit of a better place, no matter for who I'm, maybe a friend or like the next generation, especially when it comes to my the reindeer herding. I want the next generation to be able to experience it, and I want my culture alive. So that's my drive for keeping the environment in a very active spot, and why environmentalism needs to be in center almost in all discussions nowadays. So it's just, for me, it's it's a bit paradoxical, just finding finding a purpose of what you're doing to be able to keep yourself motivated. But as Maria said, otherwise, just being able to disconnect and just having a support group and those kind of important things.
And I also think celebrating the small victories, right? I think that's an important part. You need to, step away and embrace sometimes they're very small, right? But really take the time and embrace what was successful, right? I think that's an important, because the problem is so big. So you need to look at it by little pieces, little chunks. And I'm a firm believer of that concept that there's no act that's too small, right? Just taking a group of friends and cleaning up the creek. Nothing is too small because there's the cleanup, right? But there's also the stepping back and looking at a clean creek afterwards, how validating that is. Maybe as a kind of a lighter question, but you both alluded to it. Could you share something about your homeland, your local area that you particularly love and that you think, like, from a biodiversity perspective, like, that's like, I love that and people should know about it and we should protect it? And maybe I'll start off. I go up to the Arctic every year if I can, and what I love is the plant life. And people don't think Arctic and think plants, but I love that initial springtime when plants start emerging from the snow, from the ice, and you get those first flowers. And it's so incredible. The tundra has so many purples and yellows and whites and greens. It's like dotted jewels. And they're so delicate and so hardy at the same time. Like seeing plants that depend on the fact that they're underneath snow for 10 months. And then in the springtime, they're like, pa, seeds everywhere. And then they fall asleep again. Like, I just think that duality of having things that are so beautiful, so delicate, and also so tough. And you'll look at a beautiful purple, like moss campion, for example, a little bump. And then you go with a botanist and the botanist tells you, or even with anyone who knows about that plant, and you're like, yeah, that's 55 years old. And you're like, what? I just get, every time I walk on the tundra and I take in the smells and I take in the sights, I'm always re-amazed by, how delicate and tough those landscapes are, for sure. And then seeing just tiny, tiny trees that are actually like extended across wide swaths of land, and that's a willow, but it's like this tall. I just think it's awesome, and I love that biodiversity of plants that I feel a lot of people don't really know, because you get the bears and you get everything else, but my God, just walking on the tundra is the best.
Yes. Can I go next? All right. Okay. Yeah, I need to clarify that most of Iceland actually is not inside the Arctic Circle, but we are still, I would say, we are in the Arctic, because some of it is inside the circle, and we are quite far north. I'm a geologist, so I think all of this talk about biodiversity is biodiversity is way more fragile, I think, than geodiversity. But both of them are important, and to me, geological diversity is also very important. And what I love the most about Iceland is going to geothermal places and see how the rocks have altered, so they become all of these colors. So it's very lightly colored mountains with all of these patches of green and red and yellow. It's just like a magical world, and when there's snow there too, then it's just prima. And then I agree with you that because I work in the Highlands as a ranger, there's all of these tiny flowers. You're walking, there's nothing but sand, then you look and there's a tiny flower. And there's light. Yeah, so yeah, those two things are, so it's one geodiversity and one biodiversity.
I love about the most of my comment. This is an unfair question in my opinion, because it's difficult for me to specify what I love the most. But I would say I really just love the lakes of my area. I'm most of over my summers, and just seeing just that hotspot of biodiversity that a lake creates, or just water in general, and just seeing how a small leak can create an entire ecosystem that no one will ever see because it's just water there. Just seeing what a bit of pure water can do to an otherwise isolated area is just amazing. And being able to enjoy something that just being able to enjoy free water, which might not seem logical, but I'm thinking from a dam perspective now, It's something that I'm very lucky to be able to do. Not seeing a lake that is damaged by any kind of dams or those kind of things. Just seeing water in its purest form, then been touched by anyone, and just what it does to the surrounding area and what it can provide for you as long as you just respect it. It's very difficult to explain. It's just so nice to see the lake that I know and just think, oh, this is this lake and this is the area surrounding it and what I can do around that area.
I think actually that brings an important point, because the Arctic is beautiful, it's flourishing, and the subarctic as well. I completely agree that the Arctic Circle as a border is very, it doesn't really mean anything. It does have a scientific meaning when it comes to sunlight, but as a place, as a culture, as an environment, it's very dependent on, water access and climate. And Russia and Canada being like wide countries, you look at where the Arctic should make sense, right? Where there's permafrost, where there's the right species, and sometimes you can get fairly far south before going up again. So, like Iceland is part of that, right? And it's really, really important not to limit ourselves by the Arctic Circle, because it's a place, it's creatures, and it's also peoples. And as much as it's beautiful, it's delicate or hardy, it's a place where people live, and that cannot be taken away from it. It's we as humans are not, a mistake into that environment. People have been living, in Arctic regions of this planet since time immemorial, for centuries, for millennia and millennia. So that relationship that we have with that nature, and that youth should have in that nature, is togetherness, right? It's not despite of, if that makes sense. So I don't know if you have lessons that you've seen of people and nature together, working together, right, for each other's benefit. I know that, again, bringing Northern Canadian examples, but there's a huge responsibility, right, between people in that environment and the resources that to take from it, and it goes both ways, and it's in a balance, and that balance is very attainable. Is there a way to return to that balance, or is there examples of that balance where you are?
Well, Iceland there were no humans here not that long ago. So, but yes, I definitely think that in terms of using our electricity to become more sustainable, and I think pretty much since humans came here, we've been kind of using the nature too much. Well, there was a lot of forest here, and it resulted in deforestation, mostly because of humans, even though it was 1,000 years ago. So I think I don't think we will ever want to go back to the original version, because it was with no humans. But I definitely think we could do a lot better. But I think a lot of these talks about indigenous people, it doesn't really apply in Iceland, because there are no indigenous people here, really, because there were only foxes here. That was the only mammal that was here before the humans. So we need to kind of use a different perspective here, but we can probably learn a lot from indigenous people in the Arctic in other countries. So
Living in balance with nature is, well, the core of the Sami culture, just being able to exist, basically. So yes, people can exist and have existed in balance with nature. Indigenous people all around the world have been doing it, from the Sami to the Hyundai in the Saharas. The most important part is, like, the thing I've believe that would make everyone be able to do that is just take in the indigenous perspective on how we use nature. For instance, grazing it's a classic example, especially maybe for your Iceland people. For us Sami people, it's natural. We have maybe 4 areas where we have our grazing. In depending on what kind of year they have the reindeers in this area this year, and then we move the reindeers another area under another year, so the lands can recover. So just being able to just taking to account on how we affect the nature and how to make sure that it recovers from our use is the most important thing that you should take in consideration. But yes, indigenous people have been living in harmony and balance with nature since a long time. So it's possible for everyone else to do.
Again, this goes back to, talking to each other and having youth mentor other youth, right? And I agree. It's not because Iceland does not have an indigenous population. There's people living there now, and there's definitely lessons to be learned from people who've lived in the Arctic forever, right? To see how I really like that example of grazing. I think that is very applicable to Iceland, and those kinds of things happen because of exchanges like we're having right now. Do you have, if anyone's watching and they're like, okay, I want to start having these conversations, do you have any suggestions on where they should start as from a finding a network perspective? I know you talked about the handbook, and I actually dropped the link for the handbook on the underneath the Facebook Live if anyone wanted to see. But someone who's watching who wants to, find other like-minded young people, do you have any recommendations that who they could reach out to?
At least in Iceland, you can go to the Youth Environmental Association. You just go to the webpage and sign up, and hopefully then you can find yourself a way. There's a lot of different committees with different topics. But for internationally, I think just ask around if there's a local group where you can actually meet like-minded people and have conversations before you start, emailing all of the MPs or all of the companies. Yeah, just I'm not very familiar with. I know about the World Wildlife Fund. I know about the Arctic Youth Network, but just don't be afraid to ask. That's pretty much what I would recommend anybody. Just ask the people around you if there is a youth group, if there is a nature conservation group, and don't be afraid to go there and say, hey, this is me and I want to do something. Give me a job, please.
Well, we have the Arctic Youth Network, obviously, but on a more local level, it's usually depending on the size of your town that you're doing. Of course, I speak from a town with 2,500 people, so for me to find like-minded people, I find it from high school and people just I know in my community. But currently, as I'm studying in Huddinge, which is in Stockholm, finding like if you're in university, you can usually find groups that are discussing our topics. So that's a way to find it through university. Or if it's what might I just ask your community, ask friends that are like-minded. They usually somehow someone will know some kind of connection which you can hook up to and start discussing this and maybe even join an organization. It's the most important part is just asking and not being afraid of just putting yourself out there. It's I think that's the easiest way. At least that's how I did it. And again, I have a very skewed perspective as I'm from a town from the middle of nowhere, and now I'm here. So just being able to push yourself out there and ask, that's how you get it mostly out.
That's awesome. Those are great suggestions. And I'm not to self-promote again, but I will iterate that is the objective of something like the Arctic Youth Network, is to have that page where people can just ask, come in and be like, hey, I'm in this part of the North, I'm in this country, what can I do? Who can I talk to? To give a few more Canadian suggestions as well. There's a youth organization about sea ice and knowledge around sea ice in Inuit Nunangut. That's called Ikarvik, that I recommend highly, and it's based out of the Vancouver Aquarium, but it's northern, and it's all northern youth around sea ice. So Ikarvik, there's tons of them. There are also organizations that give trainings and things like that. Like if you look at Eco Canada, is a very large organization that provides kind of a bulletin board of training opportunities and things like that. So not necessarily a network, but diving into those things, you'll probably find like-minded people for sure. And then at the international level, all these things have their positive and negatives, and I don't want to talk about that, but there's a way to find people to talk, and again, find trainings through WWF or Youth for Nature, 4 with a number, has all these opportunities as well at the international level. So yeah, very, very cool. I hope people who are watching find that helpful. I have one last question, and this is coming from the chat again. And the question specifically is about Sami and about Sapmi, and it's the question is, it's the difficulties that could raise on environmental stewardship in Sapmi with the fact that many Sami live outside of the Arctic region. And I'd like to that's the question, but I'd like to expand on that, about how it's how do you do environmental stewardship, or how do you promote it or get people to engage with it, or biodiversity protection, or just to care, really just caring when they're outside of that region, right? And it could be people who from that homeland who don't live there anymore, who are urban, or it could be just young people who are in other countries that are not even Arctic, right? And they're watching right now and they want to know how they can get involved and get people around them involved as well, and what they could do. So what would you tell them?
Oh, this is a good point, because I forgot to mention this. It's only 10% of all Sami people that work with reindeer herding. So I'm, again, speaking from a minority perspective, but just getting involved in it, it's especially for Sami youth outside of Circle, or just Arctic, if they live in like Stockholm, Oslo, Helsinki, whatever. Just, you don't need to think about the reindeer herding perspective. Sapmi has existed for thousands of years. Just thinking about how the culture in general, not the reindeer herding, not the minority perspective, the culture, the language, what we do, these kind of things, just thinking how your small, the things you do might help, let's say, Sapmi to survive. Just have your small footstep might have a big effect in the future that maybe makes a big community for indigenous youth in, let's say, Stockholm. Not only some people, but indigenous youth, maybe from Australia or Canada, they can have a hub. So just thinking, you don't always think, I don't live there. Just think, I'm part of this, so I can do it. Just because, let's say, I don't live in Canada, but at the same time, I work for helping with people to just find understanding of why the Arctic is important. Just being able to connect with people and just finding a reason why you want to help. That's maybe the most important part. If you live in Stockholm and want to work with Sami things, just do it. You don't need to live here to actually participate, because most people want to share what they know. So just, again, ask how you can help, and if you can help, then provide what you can do. It might not be a lot, but all things you do always help.
I think everybody is a little bit responsible for educating themselves about different regions. So if you are living somewhere and far away from the Arctic, just look locally. What are the environmental issues in your community? And if you just live a completely urban life, you don't see a lot of nature in your life, that is somewhat something that you need to take responsibility of, to realize, this book that I have, it's made from trees, everything that I have originated from nature, and I can't just separate myself from it. I often try to, when I speak to upper secondary levels schools, like 16-year-olds, I will ask them, like, do you realize that where there is a sidewalk now and where there is a road, there used to be nothing. There used to be nature. There used to be a lake. There's this pond inside the city. It used to be a pond, not with a sidewalk beside it, but just like birds and grass and just nature. Like, do you realize that we are still living in the same land, even though we built houses? I don't think people really realize that. This is the city and this is the nature, but the city didn't just like grow from from the earth. We are still living in nature, even though we are in houses and in urban communities. But I think it's hard to tell people that they should care, they should feel it themselves, and yeah, educate yourself. Like for me, not get lost in Iceland, because there's a lot of things going on in other areas that I can benefit from, and also that I am responsible for. Things that I buy create demand, that people that things get made in other countries and people do like pollute there, and then I buy it and it's not my responsibility. There's all of these chains of consumerism and everything, that if you just educate yourself about it, you will, you can definitely get lost in guilt, but try not to. Just try to do a little bit better every day. And I think, yeah, that's why people should care, but it's difficult to kind of get this message across, because in the end, it's up to every person to realize it themselves.
Thank you so much, both of you. I think those are very powerful words, and I think a lot of people who are watching right now will appreciate just the concept of slowing down. And if you want, and if you mean well, and if you're going to listen, which I think is also important, listen. You can get involved in something that you truly care about and be an ambassador for its protection or sustainable use, right? And with that, we are coming to the end of this conversation. I know this is awesome. I'd love to chat more, but let's keep it succinct today. Before I bring closing remarks, is there anything else that you would like to finish on, to conclude on today? Anything that you feel that we haven't touched that you had felt that you wanted to mention? No, that's fine. That's fine. We did talk about a lot of different subjects, and I think that we did cover quite a lot of ground, and I really appreciate that you were both able to share your expertise and experiences with us today. Now, for everyone at home, I did see the question pop a few times. This is recorded and will be put and made available on the Arctic Youth Network's YouTube channel and on our website. So if you're looking for the recording of this, they will be available, and you can re-listen to any part of this that you'd like to see again. Please feel free to continue the conversation underneath the live here. There's a few things that came up that are really interesting. We didn't touch on gender. There's a lot we can talk when it comes to humans and environment, but there's some cool things that came up in the chat underneath. So please do take a look. I want to thank you both so much for taking the time today and calling in. Time zones, and I know we're all zoomed out, so I really, really appreciate the time that you guys took today to talk. And this is webinar number 4. We have one last webinar in this edition of the Arctic Youth Network webinar series that will be at the end of February. Keep an eye out for postings about that. The subject matter will be cultural revitalization through art in the Arctic. So youth being involved in culture and art across the north. So that will be a really fantastic talk again. So I hope you guys, I can see you guys there. And for that, hoping you all have a great rest of the day, great rest of the month. Take care, you know, self-care, and I'm wishing you all till next time. Thanks again. Bye, everybody.